Greetings and welcome back to Switch to Linux. I received all the parts in today for the computer. There's a few things that I'm going to need to go out to the store and pick up. I did some afterward tests and it does appear that the old issue also fried the DVD drive and the IC dock. So I pretty much lost everything that was connected to that portion of the power supply. So if I don't get a reasonable replacement fund on those, then I think I might just have to blast that power supply company because you know, you shouldn't buy a power supply and have it wipe out so much. But regardless, we are ready to get a new computer built. And of course, if you can just kind of do some shopping around, what you can find is you can put together a much better computer, much cheaper than otherwise. And really, it's not all that complicated. So we're going to go ahead and walk through the build. So what did I pick up? Well, first let's start with what I already have that's not changing. Whoa, I move stuff around. My case is a Cougar case, and I don't know the exact model of it because this case was an aftermarket case. You know, I picked it up. It was actually my brother's, I believe, and so it is a Cougar. I think it's like a Modern 2 build, so this is kind of the front. One of the things I found is that a lot of your modern cases don't actually have dock openings to have things like disk drives and things like that, and IC docks, and that's kind of important for what I do. So of course this is a full ATX size case, so it's fairly large, so I'm keeping all of that. What I did in the process while I was waiting for parts is I disassembled and completely cleaned everything. I took a vacuum to everything. I wiped everything down, just kind of get every bit out. And actually, there's still some things I need to put back in. So, like, this is actually a little mesh cover that goes down here for the, basically the power supply is going to sit right in here. And so I'm just going to go ahead and reclip this guy back in place. Okay, so there are 6 clips on this. This is just going to keep large particles, particularly important for this house because I have 2 cats. So what I'm doing is there's kind of particle filter mesh. You can see there's also mesh on the back of this. Very good to keep the cat hair out of the inside. So that's kind of important. But I did take everything off. One of the things, since I am going to need to wait for a couple more weeks, maybe a month or so, to buy another replacement IC dock, I was going to go ahead and pop one of these back in the front of the case, just so that I don't have any big gaping holes there while I wait for that. And I will be getting the IC dock, giving me a month or two, and I'll pick up another IC dock for that. I am going to go to the store here today and pick up a new CD drive because that is something that I do use more often than I would probably like to admit. But anyway, there is that, and that is kind of the case. Processor, I went with the Ryzen 5 1600 processor. Now, my old computer was a i5 3570K, and it may or may not have been overclocked. I can't remember. But that guy there generally was hovered around 3.7 or so gigahertz. 4 cores, 4 threads, you know, 1 thread per core. This guy is 3.2 gigahertz base, 3.6 boost, and it has 6 cores and 12 threads. So this guy here, I'm expecting a boatload more performance out of this particular processor than I had over the other one. The motherboard, I went with the MSI B350 Plus, and so we went with that. Oh, look at that, Windows 10 ready. Yeah, right. This thing's never going to see Windows. This board here is, I kind of went with this board for a few reasons. It was rated well. MSI seems to be pretty good. It was rated well, and it does not have a lot of your LEDs. As much as I really love the LEDs, my case is completely solid. So I don't really need things with LEDs. We also have 4 memory slots. Some of the boards I looked at had 2. And there is 1 USB Type-C. There is several USB Type-A's on here. This board can support onboard graphics, but not with the Ryzen processor. So keep that in mind. If you're building something, you will have to have a graphics card. I did not buy a new graphics card. My XFX graphics card still works perfectly fine. This is 4 gigabytes on board, and it is powered specifically by the motherboard, so nothing fancy with that, but that actually does great for the things that I need. I did have to upgrade the RAM because the old system uses DDR3. This board uses DDR4. So I went with the Ripjaw RAM. I got 16 gigs to start. I'm going to upgrade this to the max. Well, I'm going to upgrade it to 32 gigs in a couple months when I have, make sure I have this all squared away, make sure taxes all squared away. This will get me started. This is DDR4 2400 RAM is what we're going to install in that. And the power supply is... I've opened things up just to make sure I had a look at everything. So this is an 80 Bronze Plus hybrid series. This is, what is the actual brand? Raidmax. Raidmax RX 730 SS. So this is a kind of like a modular, I think they call it a semi-modular power supply. This guy here is a hybrid. You can use it with a couple different pin sets. And I went with that. Mostly that was one of the ones recommended by Newegg, so I went ahead and went with that. And then what we're going to do here is I'm going to walk through the things. Now, I've already read several of the instructions. We're going to do several different steps here. I probably might have enough stuff in here to mount the board and then put the processor in. Usually you put the processor in and then the board. But what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just... walk through the various steps. Really, it's nothing more than buying the individual pieces, putting them together in the right order, and that's about it. So there's not going to be a whole ton to building out the system. But that's kind of what's going to happen with that. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and I need to start by going into the motherboard case. And as you're building things, of course, you will need extra wires and things probably. I don't think I need to buy any extras. The only thing I was ever running low in is SATA cables, but the board comes with 2. So that's great. First thing I'm going to look for is I'm going to look in the board and I'm going to grab the back plate. So the back plate will line up where all of your ports come out of the motherboard at. Of course, these are specific to the board. They're not specific to the case. And so if you've ever wondered about all of the pretty designs on the back, they come with the board, not with anything else. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep everything there. Then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have a very quick look. Looks like on the board is going to mount it in here. The audio is on the bottom. And so I'm going to go ahead and mount this, just making sure that the audio is on the bottom. And so just kind of look at your case. These guys will just kind of snap right on in place. Nothing really complicated about this stuff here. Okay, so now my back plate is firmly in place. You'll see it's nice and firm. I just made sure I snapped each corner and 2 or 3 times along each other side here just to make sure everything is properly snapped into place. That's going to give us our lineup there. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and set that aside for a second. Alright, I went ahead and grabbed some gloves here just to make sure that I'm not touching any computer components, getting oils from my hands on there. Now, another thing to keep in mind is I have a metal edge on my desk, so I'm going to be constantly making sure I'm kind of sort of on that metal edge there, which is going to keep any static electricity down. And these guys are getting in my way, so let me move those out of the way. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to open up the processor, open up the case. I'm just going to examine where everything is. I'm just going to be using the fan that comes with this. The Ryzen processor will come with just kind of a standard onboard fan, and you will notice that the onboard fan does have a layer of thermal paste nicely pasted there. So that is pretty nice. And what I'm going to do is I just kind of want to examine how we're going to put all this in. And it looks like we have kind of screw-ins knobs here. So let me see where that is. So it's just basic Phillips screwdriver screw-in onto that part. And I can notice on my board here that there are the 4 screws. And so I'm just going to go ahead and line these up before I even open anything up. Just kind of verify that that's going to line up. And indeed it does, which is exactly what I have expected, because this board is recommended for this processor. And I'm going to make sure I have a panel of tools. Okay, so for now I'm just going to grab a standard screwdriver, and this guy here is probably actually going to be a better screwdriver of a variety of different tip heads for this, but these ones actually are magnetic tips. So it does look like I'm going to need some larger screwdriver here, so that's kind of what I'm going to grab. Now what most people are going to suggest is that you mount your processor before you mount your board into the computer. You could probably do it either way. I have nothing else in the computer right now, so I'm not going to have a lot of issues, but that's quite okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up the motherboard case now. Now what I've done is I'm setting the box over here, just so that I'm not setting the motherboard down directly on top of the desk. That's going to help protect the pins on the back. I don't want to accidentally get any force or anything else on the bottom of those. So we're going to be very careful. Again, I am wearing the gloves specifically so I don't get any oils on anything here. I'm going to set that very carefully. Okay. And we're just going to kind of examine the board a little bit. I'm going to look at what RAM modules there are, because there will be a certain order I put in the RAM. I just kind of want to see where all of my CPU fans are at. One of the things I'm noticing about this particular board, things are not labeled quite as easily on this board as they are on other boards that I have seen. That is a little bit problematic for the build, but I mean, there's enough labeling, and between this and the documentation and the installation guide and the book, I'll be fine. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure I have the book and the documentation over here set aside, just so that I don't run into any issues with that. Main power's here. CPU power is going to be up on the top. The other things I'm going to look for is I'm going to look for my my front jumpers and things like that. So what I have on my case, on the front of my case, is I have a USB 3, a USB 2, audio jacks, power. Of course, you have your HDD. So here's my HDD line. This is my HDD indicator line. And the other ones here are going to be labeled. So this is my power LED plus and minus. And each one of those is properly labeled. And then over here, this should be my power button. So this is my power button switch, and it is, of course, labeled. Come on, focus. Maybe? I don't know. I have gloves on, I'm going to try and do that. Now down here, we'll have 3 different items coming off of this. I'm not going to set that on the board. So one of these is going to be USB 3, which is going to be your big one. That's USB 3 from your front board. And that one on the board corresponds down here, and it is indicated as USB 3. This one is indicated as HD audio. You'll notice that the HD audio is a 9-pin. One of those pins is missing. And that is going to help us find it, and it's actually right down here. And it is indeed labeled as Audio 1. Let me just show you where that is on the board. Audio 1 is over here. My USB 3 is over here, and the other one is going to be my USB 2. And you'll see that there's a few of them here down at the bottom, so I can go ahead and just use any one of these guys. So that's kind of the things that I wanted to look at. I also just kind of want to see what type of PCI slots. So of course you have your PCIs up here and your regular ones down here. Now, typically, if you're just using a single graphics card like mine, I'm always just going to default to use the top slot, and that's actually what they specify to do in the owner's manual as well. The other thing is there is a small M2 memory. I think I actually have an M2 memory chip. I forgot to look for it. Ah, I do. So I just need to decide, do I want to install this guy or not? This is a 32 gig chip. I guess one of the things that I really could do with this little chip is have it in the system exclusively as just a little backup for some of the important system files that I don't want to lose. I'll consider that and think about if I want to do that or not. we'll see what happens. One of the things about this particular computer build is I try not to have too many things directly on it, because I try and just take all the drives out when I'm installing a new, operating system. That way there's no question about where things are going. Alright, so here we are. We have our processor, and we have a little processor sticker. I will probably display that proudly on the top of the computer panel there. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the processor thing and just kind of get my orientation. What is the direction that that this guy should be in? And it should become pretty obvious, but I am going to spend a little bit of time making sure I get my orientation correct. Now, one of the things about your AMDs versus your Intels is on the AMDs, the pins stick up. That makes it very, very critical with your AMD processors to handle them properly. The Intel, actually, the pins are on the motherboard. On the AMD, the pins are on the chip. Okay, so what I was looking for is there's a little chip card on the board. Show you where that is. So it's right up here in the corner. I'm not sure the camera's going to focus on it. That's kind of what I was looking for. It's just a little harder to see. And on the processor, it corresponds to, there is one of these that has a little gold corner. The other ones do not have the gold corner. So that's actually where you are lining up. So I'm going to extremely carefully and only touching the processor on the edges, because I don't want to risk damaging any of those pins. We're going to very carefully take this out. And the other way you can verify is that corner is the only place where there's not the third pin. Now the processor should slip right on here with absolutely no error or no resistance. So if there's anything beyond just setting it on, stop. There's something else going on. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and pin this guy down. Let me just kind of show you what I'm doing there. So it's right here, set it right on. It's going to roll this guy down. It's actually going to tighten the processor down, so it should be firm and steady. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take out the screws that are on this guy here. So 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the screws that are going to mount the cooling fan. So I'm just going to remove those screws. So again, just make sure that you're touching something metal with bare skin. Make sure all static is off. And then I'm just going to be very careful to undo these screws and remove them. And we will probably not need these screws, as the processor fan here happens to have the screws already in place. And now what I want to do is I want to see the best way to mount this guy. Most likely it is going to be mounting in this orientation, because guess what? The AMD would line up perfectly fine. However, it's probably going to might be more on the side because of that lineup. Just a lot of people are, building the nice cases where you want to look in and see right what it is. So that's kind of what my guess is on that. So I'm just going to go ahead and just have a look at what is the best orientation. Do I want it on the left, or do I want that divot on the right? And I'm going to determine that, I'm going to actually determine the placement of where the CPU fan gets plugged in. And that should be probably this one is my guess. Yep, so that is CPU fan 1 is right here. And so as long as wherever I put this, I want the CPU fan plug to go into there. So if I do this, it doesn't fit that way, and I kind of have to bend it a little unnatural that way. So I'm probably going to line it up with this. I want to make sure that's not going to interfere with RAM, which it's actually perilously close to RAM doing that. So I might just go this direction here, because that's going to be better for the RAM placement, I think. So yeah, that's what we're going to do. So now I'm going to lift this guy off. There is indeed a layer of thermal paste there. and so I'm going to hold the board sideways just so that I can get this guy lined up with the guys on the back here. We want to go kind of straight in. I'm going to get this guy lined up here. I'm going to hold the board like this, I think. Gets it going better. Maybe you guys can see a little better as well. Going to line up the 4 screw holes, and we're going to tighten these guys down. I'm going to start with just a little bit on this side. I'm going to go a little bit on the opposite side, just like you're changing a tire. Going to star pattern. I'm going to go with this guy, and we're not doing these, you know, we're not forcing these down any specific force way. We're just going to go down a little bit at a time until they're nice and firmly tight. Okay, so now they are all nice and hand tight. I'm just going to inspect each of these, make sure they are properly in place, no issues, and I'm going to verify that everything is seated properly. There's good clean contact on the processor and the cooling fan, and that seems pretty good. Of course, we're going to go this way to plug in our CPU fan. So I'll just go ahead and plug that in now because that's not going to interfere. Actually, that might interfere with installation, so I'm not going to plug that in yet. Alright, so that is that step there. Now the next step is we are going to actually put this into the case. For security, I'm actually just safety, I'm going to go ahead and set this over here, just as it's a nice, more firm system, and then I'm going to go ahead and start screwing these in. So the way you want to mount your board in here is we're going to put it in, and our back is here, or the case, so I'm going to move the case this way. And then, of course, our panel of items is back on this side. So we're going to put the board in so that it basically we're going to line those up with our panels first and slide that in. It should sit right in there on top of your screw mounting holes. So that's now sitting firmly on top of the screw mounting holes. I'm going to go ahead and start with 4 screws. And then I'm going to do another 4 screws. Okay, again, I'm not going to tighten everything immediately right at once. I'm going to just kind of get all the screws in place, and then I'm going to go ahead and tighten things down by hand. You don't want to over tighten, obviously, because this is a chip board. You've got to be careful with that. Okay, so here is our board mounted in. The screw that I used as a different one is this silver one right here. It's the same threading and approximate size, so I just used that, and that way I didn't lose any, leave any of them out. So now I'm going to go ahead and mount the processor fan, which actually goes right up here. Okay, so that's down there. You'll notice now that these guys back here are all fitting in here pretty nicely. Next thing I need to do is I need to remount my main case cooling fan, which I took out simply to clean. So basically this guy's going to be mounted back here. Right up this spot here. If I thought of it, I probably would have done that earlier, but it really doesn't matter. You know, different instructions will say different ways. So basically, I just have 4 screws on here, and I actually, when I unscrewed them, I just put them right back into the fan, right in the proper location, because I did not want to lose those or get them mixed up, and they're kind of different type of screws. So again, like I did with the processor, I want to figure out where is the best place to, best orientation. Most likely this is the orientation I'm going to do. So what I'm looking for is the fan connector layouts. So here's on my owner's manual here, the fan connector layouts. So you have here, 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 and here. So it kind of determines on where you would like to put that. So there's one down here that I can probably use as well. And what I might do is just kind of hunt around, see where the best place is. Let's just go ahead and mount this the way that I was thinking I probably would mount it. And then we'll figure out the best location for the fan there. So here it's just, again, 4 little screws. And I'm just going to kind of screw these in. Just going to do the top 2 for now, just so I can stop holding it quite so awkwardly without potentially losing a screw here. Again, the weird thing about this particular fan in this case is it is actually a 3-pin, not a 4-pin, and most CPUs fans are actually 4-pin. It works fine on a 3-pin. It's just a little unusual in that respect. Okay, so there is a specific specification here about when you're plugging a 3-pin in. Basically, a 3-pin will behave as a regular 4-pin DC only, which means that this fan is always going to be moving at the maximum fan rate. The processor fan is going to be moving at the rate that the computer determines it needs to run at. So that's kind of what we're going to do. So all of these being the same, I'm just going to go ahead and use one of the lower CPU fan ones, or the system fan ones. So there's sysfan 1, sysfan 2, sysfan 3, sysfan 4. So I'm just going to look for where all these are. That's the CPU fan. This one's probably a cooling fan. And like I said, not all these are easily labeled. So that's sysfan 1. Sysfan 2 is down here at the bottom. I'm not sure which one I'm going to use yet. I'm going to have a video card hanging out over here. But I think I can probably wire this here underneath the video card, probably without much of a big deal. So that's probably what I'm going to try and do, is just plug this into my Sysfan 2 right down here. And that actually fits into there a whole lot nicer than it did on the old case. That way I can actually just kind of keep this wire here. It'll be mostly out of the way. I'm going to have to loop it right here to get around the power supply. Kind of see where I have it right there, where the wire's running that way. Alright, so that is that part. I think the next thing I'm going to do is let's drop in the RAM. Now, on these, on the computer, it will specify which RAM ports to use. Oftentimes it'll say on the board. I did not see it listed on the board. But it does list it pretty clearly in the instruction manual. So what we have is, in your RAM installation, well, that's just telling you how. Alright, so here's memory module notice. So what it's going to tell us is that there's 4 different slots. If you're just using one, you want to use the second slot, which on this computer here, the second slot corresponds to the first red slot there next to the processor. So this slot right here is our first one. I have 2 sticks, so I'm going to use the 2 red modules as the 2 that I'm going to use. Now when I upgrade the RAM, I'm going to add 2 more sticks later, then I'm just going to go ahead and put the RAM, in all 4 of them. So we're going to go ahead and do the RAM, and let's see if I get a nice cool little sticker for my RAM too. Otherwise the computer will keep reporting I'm using HyperX, which is not completely correct, but happens. Ooh, we got one, look at that, we got it. Yeah, we got a little sticker. I'm gonna put those stickers on the case. I want to support the people that I'm using their stuff, particularly if the computer ends up working well. So I'm just going to go ahead and pop these guys out. And, okay, there is only one way to insert the RAM. I just always want to double check that. So with RAM, RAM is one of the easiest things to upgrade properly. Basically what we have in here is there's the clips here. Just kind of, I just move those down and then just make sure you're lining up right. So this is incorrect. You'll see where the slot is, like that. Just push it in, and then what you'll notice is that these guys are clipping down like that. So that's exactly what we want. Going to go ahead and firmly double check the top, double check the bottom, make sure everything is firmly in place. Now our RAM is set up. So we got our processor, we got our RAM, we have our case fan, we have our processor fan is plugged in over there. Alright, so the next thing what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put the front back on the case here. So of course we have the case, and we want to put this on the front, attach all these guys to the proper locations. So, as far as this is concerned, Of course it goes up here, and just clips on in place. But one of the things that we're going to see is we need to get these wires somewhere. This particular case has this nice line here that we can run the wires behind this so that we can help with our cable management. And it kind of works by getting the wires to run up through here and then down right through this hole right here. And so that's kind of what I'm going to focus on doing, is let's just go ahead and get all these wires down that hole. And so otherwise we just end up with wires all over the place. And so what I'm going to do is kind of lean that case that way and just kind of feed them one at a time down through there. Just make sure you get all of them. Okay, so with that up over here, what we see down here now is all of our wires are right here. So of course I should have my USB 2, my USB 3, my power, my reset, and my LED lights. So all those guys are there. Some of these we could have run up through this line up there. I'm going to see if I want to rewire those or not. Looks like definitely the top ones, the top two of them, I do want to rewire that way. So we're going to go ahead and just pull these two out, which corresponds to the audio and the USB 2. The USB 3 is still kind of on the bottom. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wire those right in the holes right here on the top. And it actually looks like they should both run through this one on the, what I'm looking at is the left. On those. So, should run it all the way through. There we go. Now that's lining up and that's looking pretty much perfect. So yeah, those top two should have definitely run through that. So I'm going to feed them through again. Pull the wires through this way. And so this is now nice and tight. We're just going to go ahead and snap this guy in place. It's just a bunch of snaps. And just make sure everything is lining up and everything is snapping in place on both sides before you tighten it all down too far. You don't want to have to pull everything back out and redo stuff. Alright, so there we are. So now with these guys down here, one of the things I think I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and see, one thing I could do is I could run some zip ties here and just to keep them neatly organized. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So what I have here is just this mess of wires right here. And then down here, I'm just going to zip tie these guys right onto this part here if I'm able to. It's a lot of wires. The other alternative is I can just zip tie them all together just to keep them neatly organized. So I'm going to grab this here, grab this way. Zip tie this in here. Like that. And now these will feed all the way under the very bottom hole right down here. And then I'll go put them back up on the board. Alright, special thanks to co-host who showed up to be a cameraman. Woohoo! So now I want to get these guys wired in. Of course, they're kind of nice and back out of the way down here. One of the challenges I found on the MSI board is it's not nearly as labeled. So to get these guys figured out, I absolutely had to consult the manual, and they're not actually numbered, but we end up having to do our power LED plus and minus, and I think that'd be 2 and 4 respectively. with your HDD LEDs plus and minus 1 and 3 respectively, and your power doesn't matter which one it is because it's just a short switch to turn it on. So let's go over here on this one. There's no reset switch on this computer, so 5 and 7 was reserved for the reset switch, which this computer doesn't have, so that's blank, and 9 is reserved. The next thing we're going to plug in is this is the audio, I believe. No, that looks like USB. This should be the front panel audio. Okay, so the front panel audio, of course, this is the one you can spot because there's that one pin that's missing, and that's on this end of the board over here. And so we're going to make sure we are aligning that pin correctly there. So that's going to allow us to use the audio jacks on the front of the board. And then I'm going to do my USB 3, which is going to get plugged into, there's one here and there might actually be one over here as well. I'm going to use this one because I know that's the one I verified on the board. Again, this is directional. You can see the pin at the top, which is aligned to the top, so that's going to power the USB 3 port on the front. And then we have the USB 2 also for the front. Notice that it is a 5 volt D minus D plus and a ground, and that's these, and I forgot to double check which one exactly, which actually I'm going to guess it's this one, being that the 5th pin is a blank, and these are both the USBs. So that way, now I have all my front pins taken care of. So our next step is going to be to install, I can either install the drives now, or the power supply. I'll probably go ahead and do everything and do the power supply last, just because that's going to introduce the most wires. These guys should be out of the way. I might need to remove the audio jack up this way a little bit, just to give myself a little more room, because the power supply is right here. So, all right. Alright, thanks to co-host for that little section, but we had other things to do other than build computers, so he went home, and I'm going to come back to doing the build myself. So the next thing what we're going to do is I'm going to install a CD drive. So, of course, I had to buy a new one of them because, yep. So I went with the LG 24X Super Multi DVD writer. Hopefully it's better than the Radeon one that I had in there. Really, it's a CD drive. I don't use them for absolutely everything. Oh, look at that. I get software. Probably a bunch of bloatware stuff. It's cool you got something there. And in the event that you needed something. So, this guy here, we have a nice, nice solid black design on that one. That's actually a little nicer than the last one I had with the light on. This is the one that seemed to have died in the great failure of all. So we're just going to go ahead and set this guy in. So of course, installing any type of drive into a computer, you just need to slide it in the slot up here. And then what you're going to do is line up your holes, which are going to be right here are my holes. Now this particular case here has these quick locks on them. Now some of them, like this one there, kind of broke. So I don't use that quick lock for anything. But this is a quick lock, which will replace some of the screws. Just kind of lock that into place. And that's actually kind of takes place of screws. I still do like to use the screws for this. So I'm going to go ahead and grab the screws, which are over here. Lock on that one. So now the CD drive is very tight. So I'm going to leave it like this. Eventually I'm going to swap out this one here for another IC dock. Eventually, I'm just going to wait a little bit. So in the meantime, I'm just going to go ahead and mount a hard drives right in here. So I got Western Digital, and I am essentially no longer moving towards Seagate products. So I'm pretty much going with Western Digital. So this guy here, we have a 1 terabyte drive, 7,200 RPMs. It's not telling me right away what the data transfer is. My guess is it's probably at 7,200 RPMs, 1 terabyte new drive. It's probably going to be a 6, but I don't know for sure. I'd have to look this one up. And so basically it's Western Digital. Let me actually look it up real quick by its serial number and see what it is. Okay, so yes, it is a 6 gig per second, which is exactly what I wanted. Now, what you do need to make sure that you're doing is you also have SATA cables that can support 6 gig per second as well. So here's some cables. So this guy here is rated at 6. Now this one actually is a little damaged on the side. It works, but I'm going to not use that unless I absolutely have to. I'm going to verify the rest of these as well. They should all be 6. The other ones, these ones here are not specifically listed, but that's quite okay. What we're going to do here is I'm just going to go ahead and mount this guy here. We have a series of bays right back here, and your hard drive just kind of slips back into these. Now, of course, I'm just going to use one of the lock clips there. It doesn't really matter where I put it. This is kind of a temporary home for the drive. I'm actually eventually just going to go ahead and mount it right in the right in there. I apologize, couldn't see where I just slid it in there. There we are. It's hard to do with one person. I basically slid it in here. Now this guy here has probably 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 drive bays in here. So I'm not going to run out of storage room. I usually wouldn't use that much for this particular computer. And that is simply because I would prefer... Okay, we're going to actually have to slide it out this far. So we're not going all the way in. The reason is these guys here should line up right. Okay, I was saying if I don't have hard drives, if I don't have an M2 drive, you know, and I'm using the IC dock up on the top, then it actually makes it nice and convenient for me to pull all of the drives quite instantly to test new distros. Usually I will install my distros over here, even though they might run on a different computer. That's actually why I had the difficulty running the Gen 2 installs, because when you install a Gen 2, I think it's Sabayan, I think is what it was. When you install Sabayan, it actually installs it specific to your hardware. And that's kind of why my current method of building distro tests doesn't work as well for Gen 2. If I really needed to test Gen 2, I could do it. It just runs a little bit differently for me. But this is going to operate more like a traditional computer for a little bit. What I'm doing right now is I'm taking my zip tie off of this because I want to greatly reduce the amount of cable space that I have. So I'm just going to leave it off for now. We're going to do cable management as a very last step. But basically, on this, I have a few different SATA ports. There should be 6, I think, and I think 4 of them should be SATA 6 gig per second SATA, and the 2 of them should be 2. So here's 2 of the SATAs, and then here's a block more. That's 1, 2. Let's see, we got 1, 2, 3, 4. There should be more. I thought there were more SATAs on this. Just gotta double check the manual on that. So right here is 2, and right here is 2 stacked on top of each other. I got this one. So we're going to go ahead and check the manual again, look for where all the SATA ports are, because I was pretty sure there's 6 on here, not 4. I'm just double checking which speeds. There you go. SATA 1, SATA 2, SATA 3, SATA 4. Okay. All the connectors are 6 gig per second. Each connector can connect to one SATA device. Okay, so they are all 6, so it doesn't really matter which one I'm using necessarily. So what I'm going to probably do for now is just pick the one that's closest to the drive, and whichever one might work best. So with this, the way the cable already angles, it's probably best for cable management to just kind of cram it like this. And that would work out best. And then just go right to the very bottom of that one. That way the cable just naturally stays completely out of the way of everything. So I kind of have it wrapping around the back side here, which is going to be covered up by this part. So any cables, anything I can put right in this gap is a completely safe place to put any cable gaps. So I'm kind of keeping my cable management under control like that. All right, this guy down here, we're going to fix the rest of these once we get the power supply in. Next thing we're going to do, we got the hard drive, we got that. Let's go ahead and see what I can best do for the drive up here. So for this one, we have to use this angled, unless I want to open up a new one. And Looks like it's actually going to fit perfectly right stacked on top of this other one we had right there. And then this guy here, again, I'm going to worry more about the cable management later, but this guy's going to loop up here. Like that. Obviously, this would be an absolutely horrible location because it's interfering with the fan. I'm just going to move it out of the fan for now. But again, we're going to clean up the cable management a little bit later. Next one we want to put in place is, let's go ahead and put in our graphics card, if I can find it. There we are. Okay, so as I said, there's a couple different PCI slots. Generally, by default and according to the manual, always use the top one if you're using a single card, which will line up perfectly with my ports that are already out, because that's exactly where the port was on the other one. This is just like the RAM. We have a little clip right here, and we're just going to slip this guy right in here. Hopefully. Oop, I missed. Okay, so pull this up here, make sure that clips into place, which it's nice and locked. That's nice and tight. I can verify the back looks good. And now there's going to be 2 screws over here I want to attach. And then when I do that, you'll see this hole right here needs filled up with this lock here, which is going to lock these guys into place. Okay, now we lift it up. Just make sure it's all aligned right. Make sure everything on the back looks good. And actually what I'm seeing right here is the HDMI is a little too high. So I just want to lower that down just a bit. I'm going to have to undo this screw just a bit there. There we are. That's a little bit better. That's kind of locked exactly where I want it for now. Tighten these guys in. And then this guy here is just going to clip into place. It's going to clip top, clip bottom, and just kind of slide it into place. I actually usually use one of these screws down here, just kind of keep it tightened into place there a little bit. But that just kind of keeps the airflow that way. Alright, so there is that. Let's see, we got our memory, got our drives, the ports, no power cables yet. Processor, RAM. I don't think I'm really forgetting anything else I want to do on this yet, so let's just go ahead and do the power supply. Now this guy here, we have some nice coloration in it, so that this guy here will produce some nice color if you like that. And then this red button here is what's going to turn your light on or off. Since this case is kind of dark, it doesn't really matter to me if I have that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to verify the direction and all the screws. Generally, this would go in this general direction. I'm just going to verify it on this particular model here as well. Okay. And let me actually take off some of these clips as well, or at least get a better understanding of how they work, because I'm going to need to take these guys out right here for the cables. What I'm going to need is I'm going to need both of these power cables completely undone, so I could probably just cut this thing off, but just in case I'm going to be more gentle with it. Okay. So this guy's going to power the main board. This guy's going to power the CPU. And then we have kind of the more modular portions down here. These guys, I like this type of clip because I can easily pull things up. Now you use the PCIe if you're doing something like a beefier video card, which this one pulls the power off the board. Your bigger cards are going to pull the power directly off of your system. So that's what that is for. And then these guys down here are to power your other peripherals. And so what we're going to do is I'm just going to need one of these guys. And I'm just going to double check the documentation real quick. Actually, there was no documentation with this. I'm going to double check everything real quick. Just make sure we're grabbing the right things. I think all we need to do is just grab one of the black ones. It doesn't matter if it's which black one it is. We just need to make sure we're not taking the red one. Okay, I'm going to set these guys back in there. And I'm just going to leave this one out. And then what we're going to do is make sure I'm not pinching any cables, moving anything out of the way, and we're just going to set this guy right in there. And it should slide right into place pretty perfectly. Okay, we're going to have a look at the back, make sure my screw holes are lining up. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they are. It will need kind of push down a little bit, but that's to be expected. There's kind of like a spring lock back here just to make sure it stays in the right spot. And now we need to grab some more screws. There should be 4 screws for holding the power supply in. So we're going to grab 4 of those. And just like we've been doing everything else, we just want to start by starting one screw and then doing kind of the opposite one if we can. Now what I'm seeing here is that I'm going to need to push this around a little bit just to make sure it gets put into place. Almost looks as though the little guy, the filter that's down the bottom, almost looks like the filter down at the bottom is actually interfering. So I'm going to set that on the side so I can get more leverage here. Again, we're just starting things. We're not screwing everything in yet. I just want to make sure everything's grabbing. Okay, now everything's nice and started. I'll go ahead and tighten this one down to the quick touch and then star pattern it up. And then just verify everything's nice and tight. Okay. Alright. So now we're going to go ahead and add our power. So on the board here, we're going to start seeing is over here, you're going to see a board that's going to take this. Now, note the direction of everything, and it's going to be really hard to put these in the wrong way because of the orientation, how the pins are. Now this guy here has like what is this, the 20 plus 4, meaning that it will work on a variety of different types of boards. It's more universal. And then we just want to verify that those are in there nice and tight. It actually looks as though you need to put in the 4 first. The downside of this power supply, if you're looking at this kind of stuff, the power supply actually does not have documentation with it. I'd have to download it. But what I just noticed here plugging this in is you'll see that it has the 2 arrows, but there's this lip that you have to have the 4 in before you put the 20 in. So I have to do the top ones first. Good. So that's nice and clipped. Verifying that it looks in over there, nice and solid. And then now we're going to put in the power up to the up into the CPU up here. So we're going to run this, probably run this. Let's go across the very top. I think I can probably weave it this way. Just going to use this as a physical block. And again, let me double check which direction we have to put these guys in. It looks like just like that. Okay, first set is in. And second set. Again, this is a whole lot easier if not breaking the wires into little pieces. this power supply is actually a little bit of a pain in that regard. Alright, so that's okay there. Alright. Now I have plenty of room on top of this, so I can do a little bit of cable management right here on top of the power supply. Won't be a problem there. So let's just go ahead and do a little bit of double checking all the wires, see if there's any better way to run some of these. And that looks, as long as it's running flush with that, that should be fine. And it does. It runs perfectly flush. Alright, so now we're going to grab our power supply box. And we have a variety of different cables. So I am eventually going to want to run 3 power lines and 3 SATA cables. For now, we're just going to do the 2. So I'm just going to see what's on here. So these ones, of course, are for old stuff. If you got your old hard drives, 3 and 3.5 floppies, that's going to manage that one. This is, of course, PCI for any video cards you might get. And I have 3 options for power to supply these guys. So what I'm going to do with this is, for now, I'm just going to have to use one of these. And eventually what's going to happen, let's see. Actually, I still only need 2, no matter what, because the IC dock will only use... the IC dock is only going to use 1 power supply to run both drives that are in it. So we're going to start from the top. And I'm going to plug this into the CD drive first. Alright, we decided to stop recording here. So in the time it stopped, what I did is, while I grabbed the headlamp, I plugged in the power up here. So it's going from the PCI slot here, which we're plugging into in the power supply. We pulled one of these guys out, and that's going to the right location now. And that's going to go up to the CD-ROM and then down to the main hard drive in the system. And now I just need to reconnect my SATA cables. So CD is on the top with the blue wire, and the hard drive is here in the red wire on the bottom. Okay, so those were all the final steps. I think the camera, the battery on the phone was starting to die out way too much, and so I had to kind of stop. The last couple things I did after I managed a few of the wires, and then I just went through, double-checked everything, made sure that everything was working good, and indeed everything seemed to be working good, and booted the guy up. It booted right on up. And now I'm installing Linux Mint, and I'm pretty sure it's going to be installing Linux Mint faster than I've ever seen. I actually just pushed the install, and it is about 3/4 of the way done installing the files now. So really, that's what it costs, or that's what it takes to build a computer. It doesn't take more than an hour or 2. And, you know, there's more time in the planning and deciding what you're going to use than there is in actually getting all of the equipment that you need. So that's kind of it. So everything does seem to be working. Of course, I'm going to get Linux Mint installed in here, start getting the backups of my home folders put back into place where they should be, and just going to kind of start getting some of the theming and whatnot done in the computer to kind of make the computer, you know, back to what I want. And I'll probably change themes up around a little bit is my thinking. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But we're going to make this the good video production computer again. And everything seems to be working. Now, one of the things that I did do is I have I want to keep the floor. The computer sits near the floor, but I didn't want to sit it on the floor. So actually I built a little shelf for it. I need to put the side panel back on, the last side panel, and that's pretty easy to do. And so we're going to do that and call it a wrap. And basically right now it is it's just retrieving files faster than I've ever seen a computer retrieve files. So I'm going to say the Ryzen 5 processor seems to be pretty quick. I'll be curious to see how well it puts all this together into a video. So thanks for watching. Again, building your own computer is not all that complicated. It's not super complicated, and again, this is a really nice system, and I only put a couple $100 in parts into it. So, and pretty much the only thing of this build I didn't put into it, the case, and those are like $50. I'm thinking everything else I had to replace. So that's about it. So, you know, if you're looking at getting a new computer, particularly if you need a higher end computer, consider building a computer rather than going to the store and buying one. It's easy to do, and, you know, I think that with enough time, with enough research, you can figure out how to do it on your own as well. So thanks for watching, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux.